Hi, in this video we are going to cover using div tags to create more styling elements. In previous videos I've shown some basic div tags, but in this video I want to go over using divs to create different column layouts. So let's get started here. I have a basic HTML5 template laid out just as a reminder of some of the tags that are already in here that I'm working with. I have my doc type, which declares this to be an HTML5 document. Then I have my HTML tag, which starts and ends all of the HTML. The language declared is English. I have my head tag that's going to contain any of my meta information, and my body tag, which will contain all of the information that is visually rendered. So working inside that body tag, let's go ahead and create our first div. So I'm going to go ahead and create a basic div tag, and inside any div, not much is really going to happen. I'm going to treat this as a containing element. So I'm going to go ahead and create a basic h1 tag and write in headline 1 so we have something that we can style. And then I'm going to create a little bit of a paragraph tag after this, and inside that paragraph tag I'm going to go ahead and place in some lorem ipsum text from a lorem ipsum generator on the web. So I'm just going to go ahead and paste in my lorem ipsum. If you're not familiar with the concept of lorem ipsum, this is just dummy text. It's just gibberish. It is helpful if you are starting to design something and you maybe don't have copy yet to work with. You can just simply look up any lorem ipsum generator. Most of them are free, and you can have it generate as much body copy as you need to style with. So the reason I'm doing this is just so I have some text to look at. So inside my div, you can tell when I now highlight this, this goes the entire container width. So I find it helpful to add a background color just so I can see what this what is being styled and how big this is. So inside that opening div tag, I'm just going to write in a style, and then I'm going to add background color, and I'm just going to give it a basic antique white, something that is just not white, so I can see where this div starts and ends. So it starts here, ends down here. This will expand as far as the content goes. Now looking at this, you can tell that I have one big column of information. So I'm going to keep this just as a reference point, and we're going to keep working and do a couple different things with our divs here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the start of this div to the end of the div, and I'm going to just do a Command or Control C to copy, and underneath the ending of this div tag I will create a new div. I'm not nesting these two inside of each other. Let me go ahead and change the background color so you can see where they are different. I'm going to do a nice Alice blue here, so you can see that these two are different. So now that I'm looking at these two things, what would happen if I wanted to, by default, these are going to go ahead and be mobily responsive. So the problem is as I stretch this out, or as this works into a browser window, I'm starting to get a lot of line length here. Now, typically when you're working with large areas of text, you don't want to have your line length be longer than 9 to 13 words. 9 to 13 is a general guideline. It's not a hard and fast rule, but typically once we get past about 13 words, the readability starts to decrease because our eye is having to track all the way down and then snap all the way back here, and it can get lost. So I don't want to have my body text going the full width of my div. Even if I only want one div here and I've just got some text in there, I can go ahead and add some column classes to this text so that that breaks up that readability, and I can have a multiple column layout. So let's look at how to do that with some basic HTML. So in this div, let me go ahead and change this to read headline 2 just so I can see the difference a little bit more. I can go ahead and add the CSS style for column count, column-count, and then you can add the number of columns you would like. So if you'd like 2 columns, there's 2 columns. If you would like 3 columns, it would look like that. So you'll notice that by putting the column count in on the div tag, it is applying a two-column design to the entire div. If I wanted my headline to sit separately and then the paragraph text to sit below it, I would then put the column count onto the paragraph tag. So let me go ahead and do that, and then you can see the difference. So let me cut that, and inside my paragraph tag, I'm going to go ahead and put the style tag and paste that in. And there you see now that the headline will sit separate because the headline is still falling into a one-column grid, and now the column count is 2 for just the paragraph tag. You can also adjust the column gap, which is this space in between. It's also known in print as a gutter. I can adjust that space in between by calling out column gap. And you can put in a percentage or a pixel dimension. Let's look at I'm going to put it in a very large number so it's very visible. I'll put in 40 pixels, and you can see how that shoves that text off, and I now have a bigger gap. So that's the problem is I'm starting to hit right towards the end here, so we're going to do a little bit more styling with this in a minute. But that is how you can get a two-column design even though your full div goes one column. So let's go ahead and do one more of these. I'm going to go ahead and copy this entire div here. I'm going to place that right below. And I'm going to change this to being headline 3. I'm going to change the background color so we can see just something a little bit different. Change that to, let's do lavender. That's a lovely light color. And I'm going to change that column count to 3. And I'm going to leave my column gap at 40 pixels. I also want to add a little line right here that divides these columns. So I'm going to add in, right in this style tag, right after my column gap, I'm going to add in the column rule. And this works just like putting in a border, so you can do dash, dotted, double lines. There's all different types, or in this case, I'm just going to default to a nice solid. You can determine the pixels, so I'm going to say 1 pixel, and I'm going to say gray to give it a nice light gray, and that visually breaks up these columns of text. So in a quick way here, what we've done is we've used divs to break up our chunks of text or our chunks of copy here, so I can clearly see here is 1, here is 2, here is 3, but without doing any fun nesting divs or other column classes like that. I have broken up this information into 2 and 3 columns. So let's add a bit of styling to our different divs here, just because, while this is a demo, this is pretty bad, it's pretty ugly. Let's add a little bit just because we're going to keep styling. So inside my head tag, before that ending head tag, I'm going to go ahead and create my style tag. And in there, I'm just going to do some basic font styling. So I'm going to go ahead and style my H1s. And I'm going to give that a nice font family of not Times New Roman, but let's go ahead and add in our Arial Helvetica Sans Serif. There we go. That already feels a little nicer. And let's apply that to our paragraph tag as well. I'm going to change the color just to soften this up a little bit from a complete black. So I'm going to change the color to being a little bit softer gray. So I'm going to do a £636363, and that softens up that gray a little bit. I also want to add a little bit of padding to these, just because you never want to leave your text hitting right at the edge. So because I'm going to do more divs in just a minute here. I'm going to add a class to each of these divs because I'm going to call these my full width divs, because I'm going to do some divs here in just a second that are styled a little bit differently. So I'm going to add in a class of full underscore width, and then I'm going to add that class to each of these. So I'm going to add that class to each of my beginning divs here so that I can apply it to everything. And I'm going to call out, so dot full underscore width to call out that class. And I'm going to add padding of 15 pixels. There we go. That feels a lot better already. That just pushes everything away from the sides here, so that way the text is not touching, and this looks a little bit better. So let's move on to some different ways to style columns using divs. So now I'm going to style up a div that has 3 columns of information in it, but uses the grid columns property that's found within CSS. So to do this, I'm actually going to nest 3 separate divs inside of a container. So let's start underneath this one. I'm going to leave that for reference. So I'm going to create a new div. And I'm going to give this a class of grid container. Again, you can make this anything that you would like for this class, but this will allow me to call it within my CSS. So inside this container, I'm going to go ahead and put in a basic H1, and I'm just going to write in headline, and I'm going to throw in a paragraph tag, and I'm just going to paste in a little bit more of my lorem ipsum in here, just so I have something to work with. There we go. So now I have this div with grid container, then I've got a headline, then I've got a paragraph. Now I need to nest a div inside a div in order to make this work. So this div is going to be my outer div. I'm going to go ahead and create a new div underneath, and I'm going to give that a class of, and I'm going to say inner, or inner div, call it inner underscore div, just so that I know that this is an inner one that I can then apply a class to this entire thing, and then one to these individual divs underneath it. So let me cut that ending div tag and wrap it around here so that it nests. So what I've created here is I have this outer div that has the grid container, then I have an inner div here, and then I've got a headline and some paragraph text. So I'm going to grab this inner div because I need to grab that entire div. Remember, we're nesting inside this bigger one. Grab this entire div, and I'm going to go ahead and copy it. I'm going to start to the end of that div tag, paste, and then paste one more time. So that way I've got 3 columns, what will become 3 columns, but I have 3 nesting divs. So now I need to call this first grid container, and I'm going to apply that grid container property to it. So up here in my styling, I'm going to go ahead and call out that class that we wrote. So grid dash container. And then I need to set the display to being a grid. And then I need to set the column widths. So because I have 3, I'm going to set each of the widths to being 33%. The nice thing about doing this grid, like a display of grid, is I can do multiple rows within the same nested div, and I can change the widths of this. But if I'm doing 3, remember, if you add up to 100%, that will take the full width. So because I have 3, my measurements are always going to be 33%, because 33 times 3 is 99. So I'm going to set this to being grid template columns, and then I'm going to type in 33% 33%, and then you see how those are starting to line up, and 33%. And now I've got a 3-column layout here with using that grid template. So what we've done here by using this grid container and the display of grid is the fact that when I just set the columns to being 3, is that if I add a picture in here, it is going to go full width. So it doesn't divide up other things such as images. But when I use this, I have true column layouts. It also, again, can do multiple rows within the same div, so within that same grid container div. So let's add in some images and see what this looks like. So within my first one, I'm going to go ahead and put in an image. I've pre-made these, so they are sitting in my root folder in the images folder. I'm going to go ahead and put in my images folder. I'm going to go ahead and put in my white cat image. And you can see there's a giant image of a white cat. Let's go ahead and put in a couple more images, and we need to then style them. So this image is, it is sized for web, but it's still pretty big because I'm working in a pretty small area. So let's keep working here, and then we'll go ahead and size all the images all at once. So in my next inner div here, go ahead and beautify my code so it's a little bit easier to see. Right after that H1, I'm going to put in my second image. And I'm going to go ahead and the third one, do the same thing. IMG, SRC, locating in my images folder, and I've got gray cat. I'm going to put in alt tags for all of my images because every image should have an alt tag. So this one is just, I'm going to put in white cat. You should always use descriptive alt tags for this demo. I'm not writing very descriptive, but still better than nothing. Tabby cat and this gray cat there. Gray and white cat. I'll set an alt tag to read gray and white cat. All right, now let's go ahead and size all of these images to be mobily responsive. Right now, they're not mobily responsive. They're just going to come in at about that size. So we need them to fit in the containers that we've put them in. So up in my CSS, I'm just going to call out all of the images that I'm going to use in here. So I'm just going to call it IMG, and I'm going to set the display to being block, and then the width to being 100%. And that will make these images now fit in their respective columns. So now I can see in my 3-column layout, it is going to respond, they're going to respond appropriately within their containers. So in addition to adding images or any other thing that you would like to put in, you can add custom colors or buttons to each of your column layouts. So let's take a look at what those are going to look like. So within my my inner div here, I can go ahead and apply a background color, and that will, because it's a nested div, it's going to only apply to that singular div. So I can set a background color to I'll just repeat some of those colors, and you can see how that's applying. And you can see the different colors there. You can also add a button to these as well. So let's put a button in and style that up. So after the end of my paragraph tag, I'm going to go ahead and create a button tag. And I'm going to give it a role of button. And I'm going to write the words learn more. And I'm going to go ahead and copy that entire button tag and paste it into each of my paragraphs, or into each of my divs here. So now I have 3 buttons down there. So let's do a little bit of styling to make this look nicer. So I want to call out this inner div that I've made. I wrote a class for it and I haven't done anything style wise. I want to add some padding to this. Everything by default is going to hit right to the edge, and you don't want that in any of your designs. So I'm going to go ahead and call out in my style tag that inner div. I'm going to set the padding to being 15 pixels. And you see that's going to shrink everything down just a little bit, but that adds a lot more padding to it. Again, that's not a hard and fast rule. You can decide how much space, negative space, you want around your elements. But what is kind of a hard and fast rule is you don't want your text running into each other like that. You don't want that information crashing. So you could also style this so that the text has padding, but not the images. So if you wanted your images to go full width, I've simply globally applied it to each of these divs. Let's go ahead and style up our button. I'm going to call out our button because right now that is the default button with no styling on it, and obviously we want it to be a little bigger, a little prettier. So I'm going to call out a background color and I'm going to set it to my favorite gray. Just a standard neutral gray. By default they have a border on them, so I'm going to set the border to none. And that will take off that little highlight that comes with it. I'm going to set the font color to be white, so color is white. And I'm going to set the padding, so padding on all sides is going to be 10 pixels. Again, if you wanted a bigger button, you could make that padding bigger. You could also set it custom top, bottom, left, right. I'm going to set the font size to being larger. So this will pump it up a little bit. And then I'm going to center these within this space here. So I'm going to set the display to being block and then set the margin to auto. And that will center that because the display is block in a block line. So there we've added buttons to each of our columns. You can now see we're getting this nice responsive card layout. That this could work for a lot of different types of designs. So that is working with a grid container. Let's go ahead and look at what a Flexbox style div container looks like. So I'm going to create a Flexbox grid right underneath this grid that I have designed. And visually they're going to look the same. Visually they're not going to look a lot different. A lot of it comes down to your preference on how you like to work. One of the advantages with using a grid container and using that columns property, the grid template columns, is that you can do multiple lines of a grid without having to break row to row to row. Flexbox, you typically have to go row to row, and the Flexbox can be a little bit trickier to work with, but they're both mobily responsive. It's just going to look a little bit different. So after this end of my grid container, and as you're working with divs, it's really important to comment out your ending. You can already see that this is getting a little bit messy. There's a div and another div. So if you have a hard time keeping track, make sure to comment out the ends of things. So I can say end of grid container. That way I'm not nesting inside that if I'm trying to do something else. So right underneath that ending tag, but still within my body tag, I'm going to go ahead and create a new div. And I'm going to give it the class of Flex Container. Again, that class can be anything you want it to be, but make it make sense for you so you can figure out what the heck it is when you're coming back to it. I'm using a Flexbox style container, so that makes sense to me. And I'm going to write end of Flex Container. So for this one, I will show a 3-column grid And then my final design will be 2-column, just so it is different than the one above it. So I'm going to go ahead and I already did these one time. I'm going to go ahead and grab them again, like basically everything nested in here, with the exception of that outer grid container. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste it right in here. So there's that without any of that grid styling. There's our little kitty cats. It's going full width. So now I need to call out in my CSS my flex container. So I'm going to call out that class.flex container. And I need to set the display to being flex. Wasn't that easy. So it automatically flexed that to being that third. So you notice it's a little bit different than what is above it, and this is because 33 plus 33 plus 33 is 99. This is going to 100%, so that's where that extra 1% comes in. That's why this looks just a little bit off. So if you are designing, you want to pick one and stick with it. So I'm going to go ahead and make this a 2-column. So I'm going to go ahead and eliminate one of these because I do want it to go 2-column. I do want it to look a little bit different. This would bother me to absolutely no end to have these things not quite lining up. And there you go. That sets that to being, because there's 2, it's automatically flexing that whole way. So that's the difference between your flex container and your grid row container. So some final notes is we've been working specifically within our Phoenix preview. I'm previewing this in a Chrome browser, so it's important to know and test often because we're working with something like these images within a Flexbox grid. They're going to go ahead, they are mobily responsive, so they're going to respond to the size of the container that they are in. Because that's why these are smaller, even though this is the same size image, it's going to go the full width of how wide this is. So it's important to test on different screen sizes. If you like, this size is not so bad. However, when I'm getting down to this size, this is now taking up all of my view space. So while I enjoy looking at cats, they're pretty big images. So it's important to set a max width on your images so they don't keep getting too big. At a certain point they will stop. This again is something you're going to have to test within your browser, but I'm going to go ahead and add that real quick. It's also important to test how long your copy is getting when it's in a browser as well. This 3-column looks better. Honestly, I would like to put in more padding left and right. So I would add some more padding left and right to scooch in. We only did a few pixels of padding so that these line lengths are still not going this far. This is unacceptable. Nobody wants to read this long. This is getting a little bit easier. So styling that still so that it comes in left and right. So let's do a little bit of additional styling within our editor. So with my images, I'm going to go ahead and set a max width to being 500 pixels. And I'm going to test that. Again, it's hard to know until within your own specific design. This is something you're going to test and check. I'm also going to set the margin to being auto. So when it hits that maximum width, these images will be centered. By default, when they're taking up the full space, so anything that is below that 500, it's centered within that container. But once it hits below, these are by default left aligned, so I'll see the space on the right. I'm going to have them center within their column. So I will set margin to being auto. I'm also going to mess with some of this padding here as well. I'm going to add an additional amount of padding left and padding right. So I'm going to say padding left. Let's go ahead and put in like 5% and test that. The percents make it a little more mobily responsive, so it's not a solid pixel width. And I'm going to set padding right to also being 5%. Again, this is going to be a thing that you're going to check in your browser. I'm going to go ahead and save this and check it out in my browser and see if that's looking a little better. So here it is in my browser. I can go ahead and see that that's what that 5 pixels of padding left and right would do to this. Would also want to apply that to my headline too. People don't want to read where they're having to jump left to right, so it's important to have consistent padding on that. But I can also see that, oh yes, now at this size you can see that these have hit that max width. These cat images are not getting so large where they are taking up that full screen. Again, it's something you're going to have to test and check depending on your layout and what you want it to be. But it's important to know that otherwise these images are going to respond to as big as the screen size is unless you set a maximum size. So that will do it for me on working with divs and div containers. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.